Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Communicate Your Brand with Intention. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I'm a program assistant at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit that is building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. So as you will see in the chat in a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So definitely make sure to check out those links and resources in the chat. And then just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from in the chat. We always love to connect. And second, we are going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please make sure to submit your questions for us in that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation, and we will try our best to get to all of them. And of course, none of what we do could be possible at the center without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, BMO, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, Microsoft Entrepreneurship for Positive Impact, BPM, and HubSpot for Startups. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. And so before we get started, we always like to launch a couple polls to see how everyone in the room is doing. This first one asks, how are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? And I'll give it just a few moments for people to think about it and submit a response here. Thank you, thank you. All right, I'm going to end this poll, share these results. Awesome. Looks like optimism is in the lead, but definitely have some feelings of fear, anxiety, and surviving. Hopefully, our presentation and conversation today will help alleviate some of those feelings. So I'm going to stop sharing this poll and launch that second poll. What is keeping you up at night? Finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or surviving? And this one just tells us a little bit more about your current entrepreneurial needs so that we can continue to provide relevant programming. Awesome. Got folks from Washington, D.C., Arizona, West Virginia, Tennessee, Maryland, Florida, Germany, Ohio, London, UK, Florida, Texas, Arkansas, Michigan, Trinidad and Tobago, North Carolina. Ooh, NS. All right, I'm going to stop this poll and share the results. All right, looks like finance is just barely in the lead, marketing coming up close behind, and then sales, but we got some all across the board. So thank you for sharing, and I'm going to stop sharing this poll. And without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest, Maureen Chiana, neuro leadership trainer and coach at the Mindsight Academy. Maureen, it is so awesome to have you back on our stage, and I'm going to pass it right over to you.
Thanks so much, Michelle. It's an honor to be here, and I can see there are people from London that have joined. It's amazing. Welcome, everyone. It's so good to see people from all over the world. I'm in the UK, just outside London, so happy to be here. And yeah, I could see the poll, what was coming through. So I'm going to touch a bit on that. And I think some of the things are fear, just surviving. We will touch on that. I'll give you some tips on how to deal with that. So without wasting any more time, I'm just going to dive in. I'm going to share my screen, and then we will get chatting. And I'm looking forward to the interaction in the chat, because that really helps to navigate and actually see how you're feeling. I'm going to put the chat box down here as well so I can see it. So can you see my screen? Is it clear? Yeah.
Looks
awesome.
good.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, this is me, Maureen Chiana. I'm a neuro leadership and emotional intelligence consultant. So what does that mean? I literally help people understand how they can be their best. I work with leaders, I work with teams, I work with entrepreneurs, I work with women, and it's really using neuroscience and emotional intelligence to enable you understand how your brain works and how it impacts on everything you do, your decision making, how you communicate, how you solve problems, how you view things. And we're going to be focusing today on the communication aspect. So our topic is communicate your brand with intention. And I'm going to be looking at it from the perspective of the brain, as you can see. So hopefully today we're going to be able to cover these points, touching briefly on persuasion skills, strengthening your personal branding, and optimizing your communication strategy. I have got my eyes down on the chat a bit, and then we'll finish with Q&A. So I'm excited. So yeah, this is me. I'm a mother of two, and I've been in business as an entrepreneur for, gosh, I can't even count, so many years. I think my first journey into entrepreneurship was about 20 years ago. So I kind of got into entrepreneurship, went back into corporate, came back out, and ran a business that I had to close. And that was when I went into a really dark place. And it was from that dark place I started asking the question, how do I get myself out of this? How can I help myself manage people more effectively? Because I think one of the issues I had with management in particular, or even trying to get people to buy from me or accept what I was even trying to sell to them at the time, was why, how people think, how people make decisions, what drives the decisions they make. And that was my curiosity. So that got me into neuroscience. And in the process, I discovered emotional intelligence. And I just found the whole thing mind-blowing, because I was then able to use these skills to manage teams, lead teams that were underperforming to be outstanding within a really short space of time. And then 8 years ago, I decided to go back into business. I said I'll never do it again, but I did. And it's been amazing, just being able to support people to achieve their best. And one of the things I say is information, knowledge is so powerful. Once you understand why you're feeling the way you are, how people think, how people make decisions, how you make decisions, or what even stops you from doing what you want to do, it's just so liberating, because you know what the issue is, then you know what action to take. And then, and it's just being able to understand that and take and move forward, with taking those actions. So that's what I've been doing for a few years. And I opened the Mindsight Academy about 6 years ago, which focuses on training and using neuro coaching. So this is brain-based coaching to help people embed the learning that they're doing. And our signature program is the Emotional Intelligence for Leadership. And this was a new program I just started for women, using scripture and science to really help people boost their performance. The concept and framework I use is called NeuroReact, which is what I'm going to be touching on today, which is rewired for success. That's the whole concept of rewiring the brain, emotional intelligence, being able to adapt, and connecting, which is really linking up with people. How do people see you? How are you perceived by others? And what impact does that have on the relationship? And then the whole concept of transformation. So before I get on, if you want to connect with me, which I hope you do, please look at the links. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on all social media platforms, and I've got a podcast called Lead to Excel Podcast. We are going to a bit more detail about what we're going to be talking about today. So let's get in, and I'm going to start with this quote. And it says, there are two kinds of people: those who come into a room with the attitude, here I am, and those who have the attitude, there you are. The question is, which one are you? So I'll let you think on that for a second. And while you are, I want you to look at this logo. And you probably all seen this logo because I love Toblerone, and you probably do. Can you see the bear in the logo? If you can, just type yes in the chat. If you can't, say no. There's a bear in the logo. Can you see it? Yes, yes, yes. I can see quite a few yeses. That's cool. Oh, well done. First time seeing it. Okay, that's cool. If you can't, say no, so at least I can just get an idea of what's going on. Because what I'm seeing here is everyone can see it, which is amazing. That's good. That's awesome. Okay. Okay, someone said that first time you had seen it, I was only able to see it when someone pointed it out to you. Okay, yeah. I think the point of this is that most times we're looking at things, but we don't actually see everything about that whole concept. The other aspect of it is that for those that haven't seen it, I'm just going to put an arrow. And the other aspect is that you could be in the same, people could be in the same situation, but you'll experience it differently or you see it differently. And that's why I like using different logos. For those that came to my previous talk, I used a different logo. So it's just interesting. I didn't know it was a bear there until you asked. Okay, interesting. Yeah. And that's the whole concept, that you see things. We've seen this logo. I actually hadn't seen this bear in the logo, and I'd been, seeing the logo for years. So it just makes you see that we can be looking at the same thing, but some of us will see different aspects of it. And that's because we're all unique as human beings, and we're all wired differently. And that's the point which I'm going to really focus on today, in terms of just realizing that the way you are is different from the way other people are. And that should impact or determine how you interact with people, to be able to get what you want, but also get the best out of them. So touching briefly on branding, these are a few questions. I'm not going to go so much into personal branding today, but it's just for us to kind of look at some questions that really go with it. And the first question is, who are you? Do you really know who you are in terms of how you're wired, how you make decisions, why you make decisions the way you do, how you view things, why you view things the way you do? That's a big question. Who are you? What are you good at? What is your reputation? How do people perceive you? When you're interacting with people, or you speak, or you're in a gathering, what's the perception that comes across? In terms of your business, how are people seeing you? Whether you're on social media, or whether you're speaking to people, whether you're pitching your business, how are people seeing you? What is your reputation? What do others think of you? And then developing your own brand and vision. And what's that brand? What's that vision? So these are things to really consider, especially when you're in business, in anything you're doing, looking at what your strengths are, looking at what you need to build on. That big question of who are you is where it really starts from. So I want us to go quickly into some science. Let's look at the brain, my favorite organ in the body, and the one I always say that people neglect the most, because we don't see it. It's the one we don't see, so the one we don't really pay much attention to, but it's the one that is so, so important. So we're looking at the brain there. And what you're seeing, I've got mine here. You're looking at that frontal part of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, known as the executive part of the brain. This is the frontal part. This is where we make our decisions from. This is where we're able to think. I would say think into the future, visualize. This is where we're able to really, kind of have that logic and problem solve as well. So that's really more of where our conscious thinking happens, in that frontal part of the brain. Then deep inside the brain, we've got the emotional center of the brain, deep inside the brain. And the key aspect of that emotional center of the brain, there are two main organs that are so important, the amygdala and the hippocampus. And the amygdala in particular is the scanner. So it's scanning information coming into your brain, scanning it to see one, if is it familiar? Do I need to link it with something that is already in memory? What should we do with this? Do we need to activate the fear response so that you can fight back, flee, or freeze, in terms of, what you need to do? And the whole idea of this is that our brain is trying to protect us. All it's doing is trying to keep us safe. So how it does that is that it's scanning to see information coming in. One of the main things to remember is that inside our subconscious brain, we've got memories that we've stored there. So when this amygdala scans, if it doesn't see anything that's familiar or something new, uncertain, then the brain gets activated because it doesn't recognize it. And that's what will kick off things like the fear or stress response. So basically, a lot of times when we are actually afraid of something, the key is to stop and think, is this a real fear, or is it one that my body has already stored in memory as fear that is not actually fear, that need to change? So it's so important to just start paying attention to how you think and what's going on, because when the emotional center is scanning, when those organs are scanning, what they do is that send information quickly to the body. They release hormones into the body, into our muscles, to enable us do what we need to do, which could be fleeing. Then you need your muscles. And one of the key things that happens, which I'm just going to touch on, is that prefrontal cortex, our thinking brain, gets shut down. Because when you're in danger, the last thing you want to do is to stop and think. For example, if a rat comes in here, the last thing my brain is going to tell me to do is, admire it. Does it have a long tail? Is it big or is it small? I really don't care. Whatever size it is, but the fact that it's a rat, as far as I'm concerned, it's danger. I need to flee. So literally, I will run out of here and leave you guys here. So, and for different people, it's different things that will activate that danger. And I always give the example of when I went for an interview. And I prepared so well because someone had connected me to this company. So I did not want to disappoint him. So I prepared so well and I was so nervous, went for this interview, and I'd wired into my brain that I've got to do well because it would be so embarrassing if I don't. When I got into the interview, I literally could not answer a question. And I'm not joking, not one question. And as I came out from that interview, before I even got into the lift, the answers came flooding in. And I was so confused. What happened? I knew these answers. I knew them, but I couldn't remember them. My prefrontal cortex had been shut down because the emotional part of the brain had been activated and literally taken the oxygen from that frontal part because I did, as far as it was concerned, I was in danger. So it's really important to just analyze these things. The other thing I'm going to get us to look at quickly is this iceberg, which I really use to show the brain. So the bottom of the iceberg just symbolizes our unconscious brain, where all our values, beliefs, mindset, all these are stored. And all these really come from our experiences, from when we were babies to when we became adults. The fact is that the amount of information we take in without thinking is unbelievable. And we're taking in this information and they're being wired into our brain and forming who we are. When we are children, surely up to the age of 7, our brain is literally like a sponge, taking in all this information without sieving anything out. So what our parents said, what our teachers said, times you were being degraded or told you couldn't do something, or you are not good at something, or maybe that in your family, you're not good at maths, you're not good at numbers, you're probably good at something else. All this information is being taken in wired into the brain, and that then forms your beliefs and values, so that when you're then making decisions, you're making decisions based on this, because that subconscious brain is what drives about 90 to 95% of what we do. So we do things without even thinking. If I'm going to pick up my cup of tea, now I don't need to think, which hand, how am I picking it? Where am I putting it? I've given the example once how I drove from my town 30 minutes to my son's school when he had left and gone to uni. And I was meant to be going in the opposite direction. Why? Because that was autopilot. My subconscious was the one driving. Because I had done it so many times, I didn't need to think. I got into the car and just drove there, and then got to the school and went, what am I doing here? So we need to start paying attention to what's wired in our brain, because that is what is making us want to make the decisions we're making, but also impacts on how we are perceived by other people. It also drives, or or rather impacts on how we communicate as well. So the conscious brain is the bit that we now are consciously aware of in what we do. For example, when you're learning to drive, you're thinking about what your hands are doing, what your legs are doing, where your eyes are looking. Are you looking in front? Are you looking at the back? But once you learn to drive, it's then stored in memory. So what we need to do is, when those thoughts come up or emotions, we need to bring them into the conscious brain and process them and determine, make the decision intentionally about what you want to do. So I'm going to use this here to describe how we communicate and how we see people, how we, how we base information on how we communicate and how people communicate with us, based on what I've just shown you with the conscious brain. So I use what's known as a prison brain mapping diagnostic, and it's a diagnostic I use with all my clients when I'm coaching anyone or people are doing training. The reason why is it comes back to that question, who are you? Because if you don't know who you are, you're literally walking blindly. And even as a coach working with someone, if I ask you questions, you're going to be answering me consciously. A lot of times you'll be telling me what you think I want to hear, or what you even think is the truth. What you think is the fact, but it's not, because deep in your subconscious is where the real wiring is. So what this helps me do is to really go deep into people's subconscious to truly understand what drives them, who they are. So I'll explain it to you, because what happens in the brain is that we've got what's known as neurotransmitters. And these neurotransmitters is how the information is passed from one neuron to another. Hopefully you remember a bit of your biology. Because I don't have time to go into it. But basically the neurons are the brain cells. And how information passes from one neuron to another is with chemicals known as neurotransmitters. Now, around the brain, you have receptors for these neurotransmitters, all dotted around the brain. But in specific areas of the brain, you have more transmitters than others. So in the frontal part of the brain, we have more receptors for dopamine. And then on the left frontal part, we have more receptors for serotonin. And then we have more receptors for testosterone at the back left, and more receptors for estrogen at our bottom right part of the brain. Now, the other thing is that these receptors, when they are wired repeatedly over time, what happens is that it then presents as a behavior pattern. So it drives the actions that you're taking. Remember, I told you that based on what's happening in the brain, it then sends information to our body and we take action. So that those neurotransmitters, the more they are wiring, they're creating, they're making you take action. And when you keep taking the same action over a period of time, we call it our habits. And then as you keep doing it, we then say it's our personality. Now, I don't like using that word personality, and that's why I don't use personality profiles. I prefer using what we call, that's why I use this, which is known as behavior patterns, because the habits create behavior patterns over time. When we say it's personality, you find people going, that's my personality. That's the way I am. But now we know from science that we can keep rewiring, that is changing the connections in our brain throughout our life. When I was at school, we were taught that at the age of 25, that is when your brain, however your brain is at that age is the way to stay for the rest of your life, that the brain stop rewiring and you can't and you don't develop new brain cells. Now we know that that's not true. We can rewire our brain throughout our lives. Yes, it slows down with age, but we can. So with that, we now know that okay, these behavior patterns are being created. So that means that you've wired a particular part of your brain more. So looking at this diagram, you can see here that when you wire that dopamine area more, you find that the person is quite creative. You find that the person, with them, we call them the greens. It's easier for me to just say green than dopamine. They like being the center of attention. They're motivated by strong ideas. They come up with ideas easily. They're the kind of people that if there's a problem, they're the ones to call upon to help solve it because they can be quite, innovative in the way they think. They're also quite persuasive. So when it comes to selling, they've developed that area well because they like that win-win, so that you win, I win. And the reason why is on the right part of the brain, it's heavily connected to our emotional center. So you tend to find that when you wire the right side more, you're more driven by emotion. So sometimes when you make decisions, it can be quite emotional as well. So that dopamine area, you tend to find that when people wire that area more, you find they like building relationships. They like people. They care about people. And that's why when they're negotiating, it's that win-win. You win, I win. The blue, which is the estrogen area, you find that they are more focused on people, caring about people. They want to help. They are the kind of people that can see people's talents and help you, or even help connecting you with people. They bring out the best in you and they find out, okay, this person might help you. I'll connect you to that person. They're quite happy helping people. But most times you find that they don't help themselves the same way because their focus is more on people. With that said, they're the kind of people who will get hurt easily when you either speak to them in an aggressive way or you upset them or do something that disappoints them. They're the kind of people that can withdraw. Also, they like stability. They don't like change. And the serotonin, which is the frontal part of the brain, when wired, you find that they like things being in order. They like structure. They're very logical. They're the ones that are quite evaluative. If something happens or they need to make a decision, they will not make it based on emotion like the people on the right. They will make it based on logic, on facts, on data, so that when working with them, don't, just be with them, give them data. Also, when they start a project or work on something, they want to finish it. They work to completion. Now, when they wire high in this area, they're the ones that can end up suffering from perfectionism because they can spend so much time focusing on one thing to get it right, because for them, quality matters over quantity. Unlike the testosterone area that are focused on task, it's getting it done. So for them, it's not so much the quality, it's just doing it. And they are the ones that can be quite impatient, quite aggressive, quite forceful in the way they come across. So when they speak, they don't have time for time wasters. Now, if somebody that is wired high in that testosterone area is working with someone that is wired in the gold serotonin area, you can see where there can be conflict, because the person that is wired in gold will be taking their time. They might miss deadlines. They might not do things on time. So the person with red will get frustrated. As an entrepreneur, that wired in the gold area can also be a problem because you spend so much time evaluating situations that you don't make decisions. And this can be as an entrepreneur working on your own, or I did this recently with a team of senior leaders. And the CEO said to me, gosh, Maureen, you know what? Now I see why every time we come together to strategize, we get stuck because we're all wired in that same, they're all literally wired in gold. So what she had done is literally employed about 10 people that were identical to her. And that was a huge problem. And that's why when working, it's best to have people who are different from the way you are. So these are the 4 areas that are really important to start thinking about. Where do you come into it? And the reason why this is important is that when you're then interacting with people, you need to put this into consideration that, okay, so for example, if I'm going to communicate to someone who is in that dopamine blue area, they don't like aggression. So when coming to them, you've got to be calm, make them feel included. Don't ridicule anything they say, and, allow them time to process things as well. That's so important to them. Now, if somebody that's wired in that dopamine, that green area brings information and you put it down, that would really upset them and that could make them withdraw. Also, if you're interacting with somebody like this, either pitching to them, it's important to let them speak, because if you interrupt them, that will also put them off, because their brain processes information in a way that they've wired themselves so that the ideas are coming. It's best to let them speak. Now, for the blue areas, because they are sensitive, it's also important to be very patient with them. So you might send information to them and they don't respond. Give them time and go back to them again. Now, and also, if you are the one that is blue, it's important to remember that when people say, don't respond to you or say no to you, you don't take it personally, because that's the tendency to do. Also, the blues don't like having difficult conversations, and they're the ones that will shy away from, really approaching somebody that they find to be aggressive. You move away from them. They're the ones that will struggle when told no. No to them is a very personal thing. So this is where, if this is you, you now need to know, okay, this is what I need to rewire. And then for the goals, one of the key things is that don't be emotional with them. So when communicating with them, give them facts. Don't go into the emotional storytelling that somebody in the green area would love. With green, give them stories here, and blue as well. Give them stories. Tell them testimonials of things you've done in the past. With the gold, be factual. Give them data. Provide logical step-by-step with them. That's so important. Be specific on points of agreement as well. And, just providing them that clear data. The reds, the main thing I say about reds is be logical and realistic with them. Listen to what they're saying, because they are the other type that if you don't listen to them, they will get angry. While if you don't listen to the blues or greens, they might just withdraw, but the reds will just be aggressive with you. And listen to what they say. Be brief and specific. Don't go into long stories of things, because you would lose them in the process. So I hope this gives you an idea of how, because one of the things I always say is, as human beings, we communicate the way we are. So this is me. This is the way I communicate. That's it. But you know what? It will be like me speaking English, and where it's landing is landing on a German brain. They will not understand it at all. So it's just like people speaking different languages, basically. And that's why a lot of times you might have had the experience where you said something and the person has heard it so differently. And that's why when I work with leaders, one of the things I always teach them to do is, when you speak to people, especially people in that gold area, get them to repeat what you've said back to you, just to ensure that they've actually understood exactly how you intended it to mean. Because that's why you hear a lot, oh, I didn't mean it that way. So this is what the map looks like when I use it. Now, this red line here symbolizes how this person has wired their brain. So I'm just going to touch on the gold and the blue here. Now, you know the saying, too much of a good thing becomes a bad thing. So when you wire yourself too strong in a particular area, it becomes a weakness. So for example, this gold is wired over the 75 percentile. So that means it's something they've been doing repeatedly for years. And it's, for them, this, you could see someone that is a perfectionist here. Just looking at that, I could tell that that person is a perfectionist. That person will struggle to make decisions because they'll be lost in the weighing the pros and cons consistently. They'll struggle to delegate things to people because I can do it myself easier and quicker. And this is where you find a lot of people, entrepreneurs in particular, that don't outsource because it's easy for me to do. And then you're wasting time not getting other people to do what you can do less of. So that's one. But also when you have somebody that you want to present to, it's important to identify, are they wired in that area and are they wired high as well? Now, the other thing that I want to touch on just quickly is emotional intelligence. And I'm going to tie them together and I'll explain to you why. Because I've shown you the emotional brain and I've told you how it works, how it functions, and how powerful it can be to hijack your brain. Now, understanding how to manage those emotions is what emotional intelligence is literally about. It's learning to manage that emotional center of the brain so that it doesn't literally hijack you. Now, there are emotions that occur below our conscious level. And that's why it's important to pay attention to our bodies, our hearts, how are we feeling, our tummy areas, because those are the areas where it presents itself. But the key thing about emotional intelligence is their capacity to recognize and control your emotions and behavior, whilst being aware of how they impact and affect those around you, so that when communicating with people, whether one person, whether multiple people, you're being very alert to their body language, what they're saying, how they're looking, what they're doing, so that you know when to shift, when to stop, when to keep talking. You literally are being very wise in what you do, so that it's not just you talking. You probably have had people that call you to sell something and they're just talking and talking and talking and talking and talking, and then you switch off. So it's really important. That's why it's the best way to find out how people are wired is by asking them questions. Ask them questions, because when you ask them questions, what's wired in them comes out, and then you'll be able to navigate that with, talk to them based on what they've said to you. So finally, bringing it all together, these are some of the tips I've put down to really help you think about how you work with people. Understand your audience. Research the target demographics, understand their preferences, their behavior preferences, what they like, who are they, how are they wired, what matters to them, what are their pain points, what are they saying. That's so important. Be clear and direct. Be able to explain your own idea quickly and simply, because if you're in a room of multiple people, you don't even know which ones are wired differently. So, it's important to bring the 4 areas together, so that if there are people that are that testosterone, that red area, you're getting to the point quickly and simply, so that the simply picks up the people that are wired in the gold area as well, so that people don't go off. But then bring in things like storytelling to capture those dopamine people. And, with your enthusiasm, you'll be able to really get surely the dopamine area, motivated in terms of what you're talking about. I've also put that here, the passion shows through, capture their attention with an opening statement that connects with them. And that's why before you go anywhere, speak to anyone or market to anyone, find out who you're talking to. So important. And then the last one is list the benefits and be sure to tell them what those benefits are. If not, nothing is going to happen. What you're aiming to do is to go into their emotional brain, to capture that emotional brain. We all have an emotional brain. Capture that emotional brain and then capture the conscious brain so that you're connecting the 4 parts of the brain of different people, so that, that way it matters to them. It becomes something personal to them. And then you'll be able to get them. And then finally, I've put some checklists here. Make regular checks to review your brand. Review at important moments, such as when applying for a new job or going to an important meeting or pitching or changing or, looking at how to adapt your business. Identify signs that your brand is not being as effective, and then prioritize what needs to improve, what needs to change. I remember before I opened the academy, that was one point I had to stop and reevaluate my business because I was traveling a lot. And I just had to stop and then go, actually, the people are asking me a lot of questions. Those questions they were asking me, the best way to be able to answer it was by creating the academy so that I could still reach them, virtually. And that was why I opened the academy. And it's just been fantastic since then. And remember to always return to the values of who you are and what you stand for. So these are a few things to keep you going. And then I've put here in the chat, write what your own biggest takeaway is from all my rambling on with you and what action you are going to take. And now I am going to stop and take questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maureen. That was really, really great. And we have a whole bunch of questions coming into the Q&A box. So if you're in the audience and you have a question for Maureen, make sure you drop it in that box and we'll try to get to all of them. So we have a few questions just around the concept of like the brain mapping with like the 4 different colors. And so we have like some questions kind of around like how that works like in practice. Like, can people kind of closely identify with more than one of those kind of roles? How do you kind of assess whether a client or like a potential partner, like where kind of they stand in terms of that framework? And yeah, kind of that looking at that.
Okay, good question, actually. Now, you see, this is why I always say we're whole-brained. We wire all aspects of our brain, but to different degrees. And I showed you, I'll pull up that slide again, actually, to answer that question. Okay, I'll share my screen again. Now, so if you look at this particular one, you can see that this person is wired quite high in the gold area and in the blue area. And then the red area and green are not wired much. So, and with coaching, what I'll be asking this person is what they do, what their job entails. What do they need to do their job? So the question will be, does this need to be wired this high? Now, there are a group of doctors that I work with who work in a fertility center, and they're all wired very high in this area. Now, some of them don't need to be wired that area. The ones that work, in the labs do need to be wired in that area, but some of them are also leaders. So it's now knowing that, okay, we need to tone this down a bit because actually quite a few of them were struggling to delegate because it's quicker for them to do it and they do it better. So yes, you wire different areas of the brain, but you tend to find that most people would. I've only seen one person since I started doing this, which was about 6 years ago, that has wired themselves almost equally on all areas. And it wasn't even helpful for what they needed to do. So they needed to adapt. Now, just quickly, the dotted line you can see there, just showing how this person is adapting already. So they're adapting away from their behavior pattern. And the interesting thing is that our brain is always doing this without our knowing, without our conscious awareness. It's actually adapting, all the time. But the problem is that it's adapting based on the information it already has. So you tend to find out when the brain adapts unconsciously now away from the preferred behavior pattern. This is when you tend to find people complain that they're bored, or they don't feel that they're being their best, or they don't feel that they're fulfilling their potential. When people adapt beyond their beyond their normal behavior pattern, this is when you hear people talk of burnout and being overwhelmed. But when it's done consciously, you can be doing the same thing that you were doing when you said you were burnt out, but when it becomes intentional and conscious, there's no burnout. And that's the difference. So that's one part of that question. The other aspect of it, how can you tell? It's, I said it before, that one of the best ways is to listen to people. What do they want? When they talk or when they speak, you can find out what matters to them. And that will give you an idea of how they are wired.
Definitely. Yes, I love that. A lot of good tips in there. And then you had like a slide that was kind of focused on like awareness. And so I think a few entrepreneurs were kind of wondering, like, is there an assessment that they can kind of utilize or like use this guidance, like kind of in that area?
On the awareness.
Yes.
Let's see. The diagnostic I've shown, I think Anna's got the link to put in. If you want to know more about the diagnostic itself, there's a link we can pop into the chat and you can have a look at it. And that's kind of, gives you, what I do is we do the diagnostic and then we meet up and then we go through, because it's the coaching, is the questioning that I would ask you that then makes it make sense to you, because then we can figure out, okay, so this is why you're wired this way, and this is why this is wired this way. Okay, this is what we need to do. We need to adapt it. And the truth is, most time when you do the diagnostic, because you've done it, it then helps you to understand other people quicker. It just makes a difference. Yeah. And the diagnostic also does an emotional intelligence. It gives you an emotional intelligence report, which self-awareness is the first thing in emotional intelligence. So it also gives you a report on your own awareness of yourself. But I think the best thing to do is look at the diagnostic, and then it just gives you so much answers.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I think that's really great guidance. So we have an entrepreneur wondering kind of if they've kind of identified where within that PRISM framework, like they land, what are some steps they can take to kind of rewire their brain and like kind of adjust kind of where they fall among that grid?
Yeah, great question. This is where coaching comes in, to be honest, because, like I said, that diagram I showed you that had some, that was quite high in the gold area, which is that serotonin area. Now, what I would be wanting to know is, what's your job? What do you do? And then with that, we can then decide, okay, we need to tone this down. So for someone like that, the rewiring process would be linked to their job. So I'll give you an example with the doctor that I just mentioned. What we needed to do is we set out a scope now whereby on Mondays, I think he was meant to give, Mondays is when he's meant to be giving one of the people that work under him something to do. But what he stopped doing was he started doing it himself, basically. So we decided that coming from Monday at this time, you give them this amount of work. We went through it. And then instead of just leaving them till next week, touch base with them on Wednesday. That way, their brain, this is my client's brain, doesn't go into hijack. So that by that Wednesday, they catch up, and then he can see how far his staff has come, so that if there was any mistake, they catch it quickly. Because if he left it for a whole week, his brain would freak out because it's new, it's different. Totally. So do you see? So that's where the coaching, and the fact is that it's repetition that rewires the brain. the more you repeat a new thing, and I always say it's like building a muscle. You've just got to keep going, but focus on one thing at a time. Don't try and rewire too many things at a time. The other example I'll give is when I had to do it for myself, when I started, my business. In fact, I'll give the example when I started doing a podcast. I started editing the podcast. It was new to me. And the way I'm wired, it's quite similar. I'm quite, I'm high in that green area. So taking time, the gold, I'm very low on. So for me, that detail is a problem. So I'm editing a podcast. It will take me about a week to edit a 20-minute podcast. Wow. Why? Because I'll keep stepping away. And I had to now say, okay, Maureen, it's time to rewire. You're going to sit down for 10 minutes and not move. And wherever you stop, you take a 5-minute break and come back. I'm telling you, 10 minutes, the first 10 minutes, I found myself in my kitchen going to make a cup of coffee. I had to say, Maureen, go back. And I had to keep redoing this. Now I can sit down and edit a podcast in one go, but it was a process.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think that's something that a lot of entrepreneurs in our audience can relate to. I think we have time for maybe one more question. We had a couple questions just asking about like, how can this framework be used to kind of inform messaging and kind of like the way you communicate through any, various channels with your customers or with, potential investors or partners.
Yeah, I think that's a good way, especially when it comes to creating content, or even talking to them. It's now, for example, there are different areas. If I'm going to pitch to someone, maybe a group of, directors or whoever, I'm going to find out who they are. Like I said in that slide, who is your audience? I'll find out who they are. Probably check, I will check them out on LinkedIn. Right. What matters to them? What do they post? What's it about them? I might even call, speak to them as well, because you've got to chat with them to find out. And that gives you an idea of who they are. So for example, if you're pitching to somebody who is wired in that gold area, they need just facts. Give them data. That's what they love. Give them graphs. Be very clear on what you're going to do, what you're going to, offer them. But if the people you're speaking to is more the entrepreneur, ideas, dopamine person, not data. Don't give data. Hook him emotionally or her emotionally. Go for the emotion, go for the pain, go for the benefits, go for, what you've done in the past. Talk about what the people you've worked with, your testimonials, what you've done before. Bring out the emotion, be enthusiastic about what you're talking about, and keep asking him, you're presenting, you're asking questions. That's one way to do it with people, When it's out in the wide world, it's always good to know who you're speaking to. So even if you're doing it on social media, same principle. Who are you speaking to? And, so that you're really crafting content that stimulates that reward center of the brain, so that then you're capturing the dopamine people. And then, you're using testimonials to really capture people that on that serotonin area, endorsements that you've had. What have people said about you? So on LinkedIn, get people to write recommendations when you work with them. Yeah. And then, because that's what they go looking for, or you point them to go and look for it as well. And then if it's the estrogen, the blue area, you kind of bring out, empathy, go for the pain points. And, show your compassion for them, that you really care about them. What they do matters. You really support them. There's something I put on my website. I can't remember how it goes, but something, and that's why I did it. It's capturing those emotional people. We care, we care about how you feel, something like that. Just going for those terms. And then the testosterone is, they want to know you're confident. They want to know that you're an expert and you believe in what you're saying. So when speaking to them, or when coming across, even on social media or wherever you're posting, come across as being confident.
Yeah.
Come across as knowing what you're talking about, because that will then capture them. Come across that, maybe somebody does say something, put comments in people's posts showing that you know what you're talking about. And it could be videos or whatever it is. So I think the key is to do things that captures all, the different areas, but making it specific for who you're speaking to.
Love it. Awesome. Well, Maureen, this has been such a pleasure. If you had one key takeaway or piece of wisdom that you wanted to leave with the audience, what would that be?
I would say just start paying attention to yourself first. That's the key thing. Is that self-awareness. Pay attention to what you say. What you're saying, is it what you really believe? Pay attention to the content you're even putting out, and then start asking the question, is this how I want to be perceived?
Yeah.
So really start with the awareness, start with you, and that's why it always comes back to, who am I? And ask yourself that question. Go back tonight and write it out on your notepad. Who am I? And answer that question, because that would really help you. The second thing I'll say is start speaking to people.
Yeah.
Or start speaking to people's brain, basically. So stop just talking because this is the way I speak. Find out who you're speaking to and speak to their own brain.
Right. Awesome. Well, Maureen, thank you so much for coming back here, for giving such a great overview. And on behalf of the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center and just everyone in attendance today, we're super thankful that you joined us.
It's always a pleasure, always a pleasure. And I hope you guys have gotten so much to take away, and let's connect on LinkedIn or Instagram. And please listen to the podcast.
Perfect. Yep. We'll throw all those links in the chat. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us today. We'd love for you to join us for upcoming webinars, which you can also view using that link that's going to be in the chat. And we look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.